Welcome to our study of Brain Target 5, teaching for the application of knowledge through creative thinking and problem solving. In our study of Brain Target 4, we considered how learning and memory are like twin stars. Mastery of content, skills, and concepts requires that we activate the brain's long-term memory system. And we saw how arts integrated instruction is a powerful tool to enhance memory. Now, we consider how students apply the knowledge that they've mastered. In the study of Brain Target 5, we examine creativity research and consider ways that educators can support the explicit teaching of creative thinking and problem solving using real-world applications. Well, some of you have likely heard of the initiative Partnership for 21st Century Skills. This group of educators and policymakers identified skills and competencies needed for successful 21st century learning. Strongly featured among the skills identified are innovation, creativity, collaborative learning, and problem solving. These competencies have become synonymous with the term 21st century skills. But as educators, how are we doing with preparing students to demonstrate these skills in the workforce? I would say the answer is not very well. For years, employers have complained that students who come to the workforce are not ready to be creative thinkers. Look at the headlines from some popular media outlets over the years. Before going further, we might think about how creativity might be defined. Not all researchers completely agree on what creativity is, but the definition presented here is generally accepted across, I would say, multiple disciplines studying creativity. I think the most important part of this definition is that creativity involves some product, whether thought or object, that is novel, useful, and viewed within a social context. Guilford and Torrance are early scholars in the field of creativity and offer these 4 criteria: fluency of responses, flexibility in thinking of different categories of responses, originality in the rarity of responses, and elaboration through expanding details in their response. So that brings us to an important question or belief on the part of educators. Can creativity be taught? I think it's likely that many believe that we are either creative or we are not, and that creativity is an innate ability. My survey of 161 students in my graduate class last fall confirmed this belief. Here I summarize 3 important concepts that we'll consider in our study of creative thinking. The first is that creativity is pliable. It is not a fixed construct, as many of us have thought. How often have you heard someone say they're not especially creative? The thinking here is that creativity is a gift we're born with. We now know that all of us can be taught to think in creative ways. In schools, traditionally, creative thinking and problem solving have been the hallmark of instruction for gifted students. Yet studies show that all students can be taught in ways that foster creative thinking. Finally, we also know that creativity and intelligence are measured differently and do not necessarily correlate. Individuals with high intelligence scores do not always produce high scores on creativity measures. So let's take a closer look at the differences between convergent and divergent thinking. Here, you see that convergent thinking encourages a single right answer to a problem. On the other hand, divergent thinking leads to multiple and varied solutions. In academic settings, both convergent and divergent thinking should be a part of an instructional program. But are they? I was fortunate to be invited to participate in a study funded by the National Science Foundation to determine the efficacy of a new assessment, the Scientific Thinking Creativity Test, or SCTT. The assessment involved responding to 7 divergent thinking questions within the general realm of earth, space, and social sciences. My role was the third component of the study, that is, to determine educators' perceptions of the usefulness of the measure in assessing scientific creativity. I found 3 really interesting results. First, most teachers reported that students were surprised or anxious that there were no right answers to the questions. Teachers reported that they had to continually encourage students to write as much as they could think of about the questions. But once assured that this was not a graded activity, students seemed to enjoy the freedom to think about the topics in different and fun ways. Second, teachers confirmed the efficacy of the assessment. They thought that the test accurately measured creativity. Students who regularly think outside the box in their classrooms perform better than those who are less curious in class. And then third, most teachers reported that students had better and more fluent responses when they had some prior content knowledge related to the questions. The fact that students were anxious or surprised by performing an activity without the right answers made it clear that they were not experiencing much in terms of divergent thinking activities. You can see why when you look at teachers' responses. I wonder if you might agree with any of their perceptions listed on this slide. Here are the words of one of the study participants that give some context to the dilemma that he and other teachers may be facing regarding teaching creativity. Let's go back to the idea of content knowledge. This quotation begins with a metaphor describing what creativity looks like. Disassembling and reassembling building blocks in an infinite number of ways. The second part of the quotation is vitally important. Here, Kraft is underscoring the fact that it would be difficult to be creative about a topic that we know little about. He suggests that we must understand the content or a concept before we can think creatively about it. Consistent with that knowledge, in the brain-targeted teaching model, we scaffold the learning sequence. Brain Target 4 focuses on the acquisition of knowledge, and then in Brain Target 5, we design instruction to apply acquired knowledge meaningfully in creative problem-solving activities. Now I invite you to look at strategies that you can employ to embed creative thinking into your instructional program. As you review these suggestions, think about how any one of these strategies might enhance your brain-targeted teaching learning unit. We should be sure that we are not only asking for one right answer. How do we offer more open-ended prompts to encourage students to produce more ideas? Finding multiple solutions to a problem encourages students to think more broadly about a topic. Another example of divergent thinking. Forecasting the effectiveness of a solution and its implications also expands thinking. Group work has been shown to be most effective when students are asked to solve complex problems that required varied knowledge and varied experiences. Analogies help students create relationships among disparate concepts. Think about how to use external mediators, especially in group work. Here is just one model of creative teaching. We end by inviting you to consider how you might create that magic synthesis within your own educational context.